Good evening, everyone. I'm Mihir Sinhasan, and welcome to the first ever Little Dingys pregame show. We've got a lot to talk about as the Dingys return for their second season, hoping to get on the right side of history over 500 and, for all you know, maybe make a run in the playoffs and win the coveted title under Captain Eric Matsumoto. But first, let's recap their inaugural season, starting off with the regular season games. And it did not start off well for the Dingys. Take, for example, against the Enjoys in the outfield where they lost 13-12. Abe Mogelson hitting a 3-run home run in the top of the final inning. They're up 12-9. Enjoys in the outfield came back. They understood Luke Foster's pitching schemes all the way to a walk-off, 13-12, the final score in that one. And then the Blue Jays, did not go well for the Dingys in that game as they lost 23-14 on a run rule. They finished up the regular season with a 14-4 loss to the Bozos. But it changed in the consolation game as they got their revenge against the Blue Jays, winning 9-7. Captain Eric Matsumoto with a 3-run inside the park home run that electrified the crowd, electrified the team, and gave the Dingys the lead. They held on to it as Gianna Barker got the final out as the ball was pipped right back to her in the backstop. Let's take a look at some of the stats from the Dingys in their inaugural season. The average runs scored was around 9.75 runs per game. Average runs allowed, 14.25 runs per game. But let's take a look at this from a more bigger picture. Yes, it's 57 earned runs in the season, but 29 of which were unearned, and they did average around 6 errors a game with 23 errors in total. So in general, they had the best offense in the league, but they also had the worst defense. And so this year, for Eric Matsumoto, it's all about changing the pace, changing the power, and starts with their pitcher. And that will be our player to watch for the first ever Dingys pregame show, Luke Foster. With the departure of Marissa Schleiper, who was his backup last year, Luke will be the main guy on the mound, and he has been, quote, working in the lab to improve last year's stats. 15 innings pitched, 17 earned runs, 8 strikeouts. We might also see some interesting players behind the dish as well. Gianna Barker currently on a study abroad trip in Europe. 2 new additions to the Dingys this year as Jason Wright comes over from the Greek Freaks and Amelia Monroe will also check in as well. Another new addition per se to this new season is a 4-game schedule, which will include 1 doubleheader sometime down the way. Not this week, but maybe next week, maybe the week after that in a 3-week regular season before we head to the postseason. So now it's time for a new segment called Who's Dinged Up, as I take a look at who is injured for the Dingys, and we take a look at Kavish Siddhartha. Now, Kavish was out at many times during the Greek Freak season. It continues to stay the same for the man from Portland, Oregon. The Gucci man out with a wrist injury, and let's see if he can tough it out, if he can play for the Dingys this season and for this game in general. So let's take a look now at our next segment coming up called Captain's Corner, where I sit down with the Dingys' Eric Matsumoto to talk about last season and take a look at this season and the upcoming game against SLB. I'll be right back here in a moment on at the Little Dingys pregame show. Welcome back to the Little Dingys pregame show. I'm Mihir Sinhasan, and joining me now is the Dingys captain, Eric Matsumoto, for the first ever edition of Captain's Corner. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Of course, happy to be here.
So when we take a look back to last season, of course, 0-3 during the regular season, you get a win against the Blue Jays, getting revenge in that regards in the consolation game. What were the emotions like to wrap up the season, especially knowing that the start wasn't what you expected?
I mean, at the end of the day, we knew we were a good team. The numbers back that up. We had the best offense in the league by far. And, it felt good to finally feel like we got rewarded for that. And obviously it was a tough game, very close in the end. 9-7, I believe, was the final. But being able to get that win, knowing that we could do it, and then giving us the opportunity, hopefully take some of that momentum into this season.
Absolutely, a 3-run inside the park home run hit by you as well that kind of steered momentum in towards your favor. But now let's take a look at this season. And I want to talk about the pitching and catching rotation for a while, especially who's on the mound. And we talked about Luke Foster earlier in the pregame, and Luke did a really good job at times last year, and he really took the momentum as the starting pitcher. He doesn't have Marissa Schleiper backing him up this year. What are the expectations for him? What do you want to see from him on the mound this year?
I mean, at the end of the day, the system is designed for him to fail. It's done in a way that is meant for him to give up hits. It is tough to throw strikes when you're having to lob the ball like that. And so I really commend everything that he's done. But I think the main thing is that we got to stop the bleeding. We can't let the wheels fall off the wagon. That was something we struggled with a lot on the defensive end last year, was we would have things start to go wrong, and then they would kind of snowball. We gave up a lot of big innings, particularly that big one at the end of the second game. I believe it was 15 runs. So, it's really making sure to take the time to reset, to both on the pitching side and the defense side, to really understand that things happen, but we're ready to move on, and that's something that I, as a captain, really need to make sure that, I'm making sure everyone's keeping their heads on.
Looking at this first game of the season, it's against Team SLB, which is not a team the Dingys have played before, but for the Greek Freaks, as you were a part of earlier this season, that is a team that has a lot of emotions with it. SLB ended up taking Greek Freaks out in the first postseason game that the Greek Freaks played earlier this season, an absolute rout in favor of Team SLB that ended up being the intramural champions downtown. But that's besides the point. Now we're playing on the diamond. What do you expect to see from this team? Because I would assume they're bringing back a lot of their key players from the basketball court. And how do you prepare your team to just be in this type of situation when you have so much emotions tied to this side?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a whole different sport. I mean, look at my Greek Freaks numbers versus my Little Dingys numbers. It's clear as day. It's a new game. At the end of the day, SLB is just another opponent, and we're going to treat them just like any other opponent. We're a passionate team. We're a team that does play with a lot of emotion, but we're going to really harness that so that we can put our best foot forward, start the season out on a good note.
Little Dingys will start it off just in a few moments against SLB, trying to pick up their first regular season win in franchise history. Eric, thank you for joining me, and thanks for tuning in to the first ever Little Dingys pregame show. For the call from ASU Preparatory Academy, here's Mihir Sinhasan.